Born as Tafari Makonnen in 1892, he became regent of Ethiopia in 1916 under Empress Zewditu. He was crowned emperor in 1930 when he took the name Haile Selassie I, meaning Might of the Trinity. Haile Selassie ruled Ethiopia for 44 years in total, in two separate periods of rule. His first reign was from 1930 to 1936. He was overthrown by the Italian invasion in 1936 during the Second Italo-Ethiopian War. He went on exile to Britain in 1936, where he lived till 1941, while Ethiopia was under Italian occupation. He returned to power in 1941 after British forces helped defeat the Italians in World War II. His second reign started in 1941 when he was restored to the throne. He ruled Ethiopia until he was overthrown by the Derg in a military coup in 1974. Haile Selassie is often praised for modernizing Ethiopia, resisting Italian colonization, and being a symbol of African unity. However, his governance had several shortcomings, which contributed to his eventual downfall. Although he was recognized as a symbol of African unity, some criticized his reluctance to support revolutionary independence movements in African nations. His support for Western-backed regimes alienated some Pan-Africanists. He ruled as an absolute monarch, centralizing power and suppressed political opposition. Despite introducing a constitution in 1931 and later reforms in 1955, real democratic participation was minimal. He introduced the first Ethiopian constitution in 1931 and advocated for education, infrastructure, and centralization of power. He was the founding father of the Organization of African Unity, OAU, in 1963, which later became the African Union, AU. Despite his efforts to modernize Ethiopia, the country remained heavily dependent on Western aid. The reliance on foreign support made the economy vulnerable and worsened public resentment. Ethiopia remained one of the poorest countries in the world during his reign. He resisted calls for land reform and democracy, even as demands grew in the 1960s and 1970s. The feudal land system favored the nobility, while peasants lived in extreme poverty. In 1973, famine struck, which became known as the 1973 Wallow Famine. This famine killed hundreds of thousands, yet the government downplayed it and continued lavish spending, fueling public outrage. His government was slow to respond, and reports suggest that he even hid the crisis from the public and international community. Widespread student protests and growing military discontent emerged in the 1960s and 1970s. His failure to modernize the military and address soldiers' grievances led to a mutiny, which ultimately helped the Derg overthrow him in 1974. Haile Selassie, the former emperor of Ethiopia, died on August 27, 1975, at the age of 83. Officially, the Ethiopian government at the time claimed he died of respiratory failure following complications from a prostate operation. However, many believe he was murdered by the military regime, the Derg, which had overthrown him in 1974. There are strong suspicions that he was either strangled or suffocated while under house arrest in the Grand Palace in Addis Ababa. In 1992, after the fall of the Derg, his remains were discovered buried under a toilet in the palace grounds. In 2000, he was given a formal funeral, though the Ethiopian government did not recognize it as a state funeral. His death remains controversial, with many believing he was assassinated by the military junta that deposed him. Haile Selassie's downfall marked the end of Ethiopia's monarchy and ushered in a violent era of military rule. His legacy remains controversial. Some see him as a great African leader, while others blame him for failing to modernize Ethiopia in time. Although he remains a respected historical figure, his governance was marked by missed opportunities for meaningful change. The Derg, led by Mengistu Haile Mariam, established a brutal communist regime. Thousands of political opponents were executed during the Red Terror from 1977 to 1978. Ethiopia fell into civil war, famine, and dictatorship for decades. So here you have it, folks. This is the story of Haile Selassie. If you enjoyed hearing about one of the most significant African leaders of the 20th century, whose downfall and death ended up in his burial in his toilet, then kindly leave your comments in the comments section below. And thanks for tuning in. I will be back with the next broadcast. Good day.